So how many variables would you have to put into a machine learning system to predict exactly what the implications of a global economic turndown due to COVID are? And how would you have populated that last year?
Mhm.
The quick answer is you wouldn't be able to, and nobody did. Um, so those issues, when you get to big, broad risk issues, are very difficult to pre-populate with any level of certainty.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Engati Engage. I'm Aish, and for this episode, we have the pleasure of welcoming Steve Tunstall.
Hi, nice to be here.
Before I dive in, remember to subscribe to our channel for more exclusive content from thought leaders from around the globe. And stick around till the end because we have a huge surprise for you. So let's begin with a quick introduction of Engati. Engati is the world's leading multilingual no-code chatbot platform, available across 14 channels with 25,000 bots. Created across 186 countries in every domain and use case. We run the Engati blog and video channel, which receives upwards of 300,000 visitors annually. And now for our guest. Steve is the CEO and co-founder of Inzsure Pte. Limited, an insurtech platform transforming the commercial insurance experience for SME customers. Steve is an insurtech influencer, insurance and risk champion with 30 years of experience and 15 years of P&E responsibility. He's a contributor to the InsurTech book, a top seller on Amazon. Steve has held the position of CEO, managing director, or equivalent in 6 companies in 4 countries. With global experience in over 100 countries, he brings a broad base and pragmatic approach to the leadership of insurance, risk, and opportunity. Welcome to the show, Steve.
Thanks very much. It's great to be here. And it reminds me when you say I've been working in over 100 countries, the last few weeks I'm just working in one, and we're just saying it's getting pretty frustrating.
Yeah, I hope everyone's being safe out there. So let's begin with an open question. Why insurance and why tech?
Yeah, well, it's worthwhile asking that question for the insurance industry, because the insurance industry is frankly pretty old-fashioned. So it's probably one of the last areas of the fintech space to really have some technology making a big impact on it. And there's a number of reasons for that. If we look at most of the other areas, so the banking services areas and financial transactions generally, and wallets and moving money, that's been pretty active now for the best part of a decade, really. And we've got big global players as well as local players who are really making a big impact on the way that sort of business works.
Mm-hmm.
Insurance has been a bit slower, but we are making significant progress now. The way I can break this down is the bits that are moving really quite quickly are the personal lines in some areas, so things like motor, travel insurance, home insurance. All those things you can buy in a lot of countries online now. And also life insurance. Life insurance was a little bit slower to adopt, but now that's coming a bit more online as well now. You can buy policies online. The area I specialize in is commercial insurance. So that's the insurance that businesses buy. So things like property, liability, workers' comp, marine, cyber protection, directors and officers, those sorts of things. This is probably the last sector to really go online. And there's some really good reasons why it's taken so long. So if you look at a standard motor policy or a travel policy, pretty well 80% of those policies tend to be quite commoditized.
Right.
And you can get something that suits you quite easily. And maybe there's 20% where you need some sort of bells and whistles that make it a bit special for you. In the commercial insurance space, in property and casualty, it tends to be the other way around. Something like 20% is commoditized and straightforward, and about 80% needs some sort of tailoring to make it suitable for your company. So that means it's less easy to do in an aggregated sense. And an aggregator doesn't really work so well for businesses either. When you're a personal lines customer, you can just search everything, find the cheapest, and as long as you've set the criteria right, hopefully you'll get something that'll pay your claims. For a commercial business, you're looking much more on the long-term relationship. You want the full life of the policy. You want to be able to manage that on a platform, and you want some help with getting claims dealt with, because commercial claims tend to be quite complex. So if you're swapping from an intermediary, a human being who helps you with that at the moment, you need to move to a solution where you're going to get the same level of support. And we're only now getting to the point where we have that level of sophistication on our platform.
Right. So how has the insurance industry transformed digitally, and what post-pandemic trends do you see?
Well, I think it's a slow cooked meal. It's not fast food, and it varies by jurisdiction. It's varying quite widely from country to country. I mean, I've been in Asia for 25 years, but I grew up in England. And when I was a kid, you could walk down a typical high street and you'd find an insurance agent shop, or an insurance broker would have a shop. That's all gone in the UK. So the UK has changed very quickly. Something between 70 and 90% of insurance policies in the UK are now sold online. So all of those physical premises have all gone now. That's just not, it's just ancient history. And a lot of other countries are on the same sort of trajectory, Australia, New Zealand, some European countries, less so in the US, but things are starting to change there slowly. And in Southeast Asia and across Asia generally, it's a very mixed pattern. Obviously, many jurisdictions in Asia are starting from a much lower base in terms of the customer buy into insurance. And there's much less insurance been sold in Asia in the past. But what is happening here is it depends on the jurisdiction. Some places are embracing the technology, some places less so. One of the biggest issues in Asia is actually the regulators understanding what the technology could do and permitting it. Obviously, regulators have got a remit, excuse me.
Of course.
Obviously, regulators have got a remit to protect the customer, and there's a bit of a danger, and we're seeing this in a number of jurisdictions, where they interpret that as preventing anything new happening, so that they don't have a problem to deal with. Of course, the reality is the customers are not exactly being well served at the moment. So the only way they're really going to get change is through adoption of technology. Right. But it's taking a while for people to get that message in some countries.
So why do you think this adoption rate has been so slow in particular? Depending on various countries, why do you think there's a sort of resistance to adopting? Is it more on the customer end, or is it more on the company end?
It's a complex situation, really. It's one of the few industries still where the intermediary plays an extremely important role. And of course, at the moment, we have a system where most of the intermediaries are human beings. So the human being doesn't necessarily want to do themselves out of a job and replace themselves with technology. So that's the first issue. And of course, those human beings have all the customer relationships from a historical perspective. One of the reasons that there's still a need for those people, and they do serve a very good function, is that a lot of customers are poorly educated about insurance. They don't know what they need, they don't know why they need it, and a lot of people would like to talk through the issues before they buy. And at the moment, because chatbot technologies like your own are just starting to move into this sector, there is no alternative in some cases to sitting down and just chatting with someone. Now, because the intermediaries control those relationships to a greater or lesser extent with the customer, the insurers themselves are struggling to really make sure those intermediaries then adopt new technology. So unless the insurers can see a significant opportunity in increasing their profit or bottom line, it's then questionable for them should they invest so much in tech if it's not actually going to be a big turning point for them and their business. If it's not going to massively increase their market share, then why should they bother? And then on the other side, as I say, you've got the customers who are like, well, I've been buying this through, Joe or whoever it is for 20 years now. So why should I change? What's the motivation to change?
Right.
So you've got that sort of quite a complex ecosystem, which is very much driven by relationships. And the reason the relationships are so important in insurance is that, nobody wakes up in the morning and goes, yay, I'm going to buy insurance today. There's no instant gratification with insurance. There's no new car smell. You're basically doing something to hopefully protect your future, but you may never need to claim. You may never need to use that backstop. So there's generally a tendency for people to sort of, people and businesses to put off that buying decision until it's absolutely necessary, or unless, of course, it's enforced by law, which it is for some lines in some countries. So that's where the intermediaries at the moment have played a very strong role historically in actually selling the product and making sure that they create that demand. And that's an unresolved question for the future, is how that will play out. And I could talk a lot more about that, but I'll stop for now.
So how do you think AI and automation will help with selling these intangible products?
Well, I think it's going to be critically important, and it's the question is not if, it's when. But it depends on the quality of the interface.
Right.
If we as customers are used to talking to a human being, you have a certain parameter where you have a certain level of trust in that relationship. Now, actually, a lot of those relationships are pretty poor. A lot of people don't trust their insurance agents, and that's part of the challenge for the industry. But there's a certain bar set there, and if that customer experience is going to be transferred online through an AI or a chatbot of some type, then that has to start at a certain level. So it's not appropriate to start at 0. It has to start at, say, 40 out of 100 in terms of the quality out of the gate. Otherwise, no one will use it and no one will trust it. So I think that's some of the key issues that the industry faces, is how do you take 15, 20 years of experience of an intermediary and put that into a meaningful interface, whether it's a chatbot or another form, that can then convince the customer that it's impartial and has their interests at heart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I feel like a lot of people also, I don't know if self-service is big in InsurTech right now, but I don't think there's a lot of trust that goes into doing a self-service sort of thing. Like, I feel like customers don't tend to trust themselves when it comes to self-service products. So how do you think we can change this so that customers are able to do so? Is that something that the company themselves need to work on in terms of their interface, or what do you think?
Well, it's one of the things that we've tried to address head on, because I'm not an insurance person, I'm a customer. So I've been buying insurance for big and small companies for 30 years. Right. So what we've done with our platform is we deliberately position that to be the expert for the customer. Mm-hmm. So when we do the data collection through the onboarding process, the main objective of that is not to satisfy some remote insurance company about what they need. It's so we can size exactly what policies should be right for that customer. And then we use our expert matching engine to say, okay, we recommend you should have A, B, C, and perhaps you want D as well. And then we put the options up, and then we put some nice little sliders on the screen, and the customer can take it up or take it down if they have different parameters they want to play with. So that that functional toying with the process, enjoying what's going on in the process and seeing what it does to the pricing, I think that's where customers will start to go, oh, okay, well, maybe I have a little bit more of that. Oh, wow, that's made the price go up a lot. Maybe I just put it back where it was and I'll just buy that one. So that's part of the education process. There's a huge issue there. I mean, if you take almost any other product you can think of, if I randomly walked into an estate agent, for example, and say I want to buy a house, and the estate agent said, well, here's a lovely blue one here, and then you just went, okay, you say it's good, I'll buy it. And then you decide a year later, actually, I didn't want a blue house, I wanted something entirely different. Well, tough. You should have taken some responsibility for your decisions.
Right.
I think the same is true with financial products. Partly it's the responsibility of the industry to make sure they're clear and easy to understand, but the customer has a responsibility too. The customer has to make sure they're buying the right things. And we try and focus on selling the appropriate level of insurance, not massively upselling. So some intermediaries, they're constantly upselling, they're constantly selling you new things and exciting things. And I mean, literally yesterday, I was listening on the radio here, and there was a guy in Singapore, one of the famous radio presenters here, saying he's really pleased that he doesn't get unwanted visitors because of COVID at the moment. So his insurance agent doesn't come to his house anymore. And I'm like, yes, that's the problem. That's the issue the industry has. And that's what technology can resolve, as long as we can demonstrate impartiality and transparency.
Right. I completely agree with you. I think it's brilliant that you have an interface that is user-friendly and that actually educates users in terms of using the sliders. And because I feel like if it's just a sort of like, if it's a form where you would just have to type your answers, and then it doesn't really help the user that much. But I think having a friendly user interface with sliders and other more graphic representations, I think that could really help. And I agree that also, the customer does have a responsibility to sort of Google their own products and figure out what's going to suit them and whatnot. And I think maybe chatbots can also help with assisting that process. Like it'll help in educating and also having an interface that the customer can speak to on maybe a website in case they have questions, so that they're more well informed. I think that'd be incredibly helpful.
I agree. I mean, the challenge is populating the chatbot. The challenge is having sufficient collected knowledge that's essentially referenced and catalogued in such a way that it can be deployed efficiently, because there is obviously a huge range of potential questions that anybody could ask. And the danger with any of these systems, and there's a couple of chatbots I am afflicted with here in Singapore, where one of them belongs to one of my banks, and essentially the only thing I use that chatbot for is can I get to speak to a human being, please? Because I know that, because it's not been populated correctly. So it's all about doing the thing properly and making sure we populate it with the correct decision tree processes. Otherwise, it can be problematic.
Yes, I completely agree with you. So speaking of chatbots and technology and educating the customer, how is tech and AI helping with risk assessment?
Well, it depends on the context of risk assessment. I mean, again, it's the customer who has to assess their risks and decide whether they want to, I mean, whether you're a person and it's just in your bank account, or whether you're a company and you're talking about your balance sheet. Do you want to keep that risk on your balance sheet, or do you want to get someone to share the pain if something goes badly wrong? And it's a fairly simple equation, really. You can work through the options yourself. If I did something wrong and it cost me $10, then actually I'm probably okay. I probably don't need an insurance policy that pays me $10 when that thing goes wrong. But if I did something wrong and it cost me $1 million, then for most of us, we'd probably say, well, do you know what? If a fire burned down my house and it's going to cost me $1 million, well, I'd probably like some insurance for that, because I can't just pay for that out of my monthly salary. It's something where I really need support. So that whole risk assessment thing, again, there's a certain a level of accountability the individual or the company has to take to think that through. But of course, insurance advisors can also help on that as well, and that's going back. That's what we sort of built into the matching engine. Is you put a few criteria in, and we'll tell you whether it makes sense to have insurance for that sort of issue or not. And obviously, long story short, you need an umbrella when it's raining really heavily. You don't need one just for a couple of drops of rain. It's these simple analogies play out no matter how big or complicated the risk is.
Mm-hmm.
Balance sheet. Do you want to keep that risk on your balance sheet, or do you want to get someone to share the pain if something goes? The danger at this stage, and I've looked at a lot of machine learning systems, and I'm actually an advisor for a very advanced AI out of South Africa as well. And we've done a lot of thinking about this. The challenge at the moment is the huge diversity of potential input variables. If you talk to a big company, for example, I'll just take one example. If you talk to a big company and say to the CEO, what's the thing that keeps you up at night and what worries you the most? I know exactly what he's going to say at the moment. Well, global economic downturn as a result of COVID.
Right.
Obviously, everybody's worried about that from a personal job protection, never mind anything else. So how many variables would you have to put into a machine learning system to predict exactly what the implications of a global economic turn down due to COVID are, and how would you have populated that last year?
Mm-hmm.
The quick answer is you wouldn't be able to, and nobody did. So those issues, when you get to big, broad risk issues, are very difficult to pre-populate with any level of certainty. And I know this because I've been looking at trying to make predictive calls on risk management for 30 years, basically.
Mm-hmm. Moving on to my next question. How are AI-powered chatbots changing the customer support scenario in insurance?
Well, I think so far as I've seen so far, not a lot. I haven't seen much yet that's really helping in this space. And it's partly going back to the complexity that I've been mentioning before. However, I think it's definitely the future. I think it's definitely the way things are going to go.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen, this is anecdotally, but also we did some market research on this as well, but it wasn't for a very large sample. People actually, they're a little bit more trusted. They're prepared to trust what a website tells them or what a chatbot tells them slightly more often than some insurance agent that they just met in the street and they said, I can sell you some insurance. So there's a sense that people are slightly more trusting of an online resource than they are of human individuals, which is actually quite a sad indictment on the industry, I'm afraid. But that's the reality of where we are. So I think there's a huge opportunity given a certain number of promises and parameters. So assuming that we can be perceived as trustworthy, then an online solution that does all these things is definitely going to be the way of the future. But it has to be clear. It has to do that education bit. It has to be transparent. And I'm a big advocate for actually telling the customer everything. I should tell them exactly what the commission structure is. I should tell them how that plays out. What are they paying for the payment portal? Everything. So all of that, the more that's laid out, the better.
Right.
I think the other thing is that cannot then be a one company solution. So if you go to one company for a price, you're always going to be sitting there in the back of your head going, well, is this the most expensive company? Is this the cheapest company? How do I know? So it has to be at least 3 offerings, so you've got some comparative, and they have to be respectable, trusted companies, because something like insurance, the last thing you want to happen is you have a claim and it turns out it's a company that doesn't want to pay your bill. So in that situation, it's worse than nothing and will actually be detrimental to the industry anyway. So having those parameters in place will be critical to make sure that that trust builds over time. So for all those chatbots and people who are working for single company solutions, actually you're not solving the problem in insurance. It's you're just deflecting it for a little while.
Oh my goodness.
The competition.
Mm-hmm. That's incredibly interesting, and I think this is something everyone should keep in mind when they're considering getting into buying insurance. So I think that's incredibly helpful. So thank you for that. So we actually wrote a book on the evolution of customer experience, and because interacting with customers is such a huge aspect of insurance policies, how is technology helping the insurance industry in improving customer experience?
Well, I think it's bluntly, it's still fairly early days for the insurance sector. I'm seeing, I mean, if you look around the world, there are now a lot of insurance aggregators in different countries. Now, I touched on this before. So there's a lot of places you can go to, and I won't name any particular companies, but there's a lot of them are now global players with operations in lots of different countries. And an aggregator is great if you're buying a well-defined product. So if you're buying motor insurance and you know the make and model of your car, you know the age of your car, you can put these parameters into a system and the system will tell you fairly quickly, which is the cheapest policy for you. And that's great as long as you then read the small print and work out what the deductible is or the excess. So how much are you going to have to pay if you bump your car before the insurer starts paying? And of course that can vary wildly. For some companies it's zero. They'll pick up all the costs. For other companies, and I've seen quite unscrupulous products now coming into some markets, they don't kick in until you've paid the first $10,000. Now, actually, for most of us, that means I'm going to write my car off. So I'm never going to get a claim paid on that insurance policy, but it will come up as the cheapest policy on the aggregator. So you have to be careful here because there's a real risk that poorly applied aggregators actually continue to cause distrust amongst customers, because if they buy the cheapest policy and the cheapest policy doesn't perform as expected, then that customer is just going to get even more cynical and bitter about the way the insurance industry looks after its own, which has always been one of the big criticisms. Mm-hmm. So I think there's an issue with aggregation. So that's one thing, but that's what's being adopted and moving the quickest. For me, I think there's more of a need for a broader-based competitive approach, which not only looks at the selling point, but looks at the management point as well. And let's be honest, even in the current systems where there's human beings, you get a lot of agents and brokers who are just really disinterested when you've actually got a claim. They're no use at all. These people don't want to know. In fact, I got a case yesterday where a guy had been told by the intermediary that he wasn't allowed to help him get the claim paid by law, and that's just nonsense. That's just, I mean, that's when the rubber hits the road. Is are you going to help me get the damn claim paid or not? And I think that's that again. That proof is in the eating of the pudding. Yeah, I mean, when you have a claim, will that partner actually help you get the money out that you deserve and you're entitled to? So I think there's more to it than just stack them high and set them cheap. It's about how do we replicate the full end-to-end process, and I think it's critically important that customers understand that there's a wide range of things out there. And at the moment, it's a little bit Wild West. It's quite difficult to tell that when you just first go onto someone's website.
Right. I feel like chatbots also need to have that ability to empathize, because when it comes to insurance, obviously it can be not a grim topic, but it's quite serious, obviously, and there's a fair deal of emotion that goes into it. So I feel like maybe chatbots and AI technology should be able to empathize with the customer, or at least if it can't, then there should be a transition into a human, a live agent, so that they can help in understanding.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the last thing you need is a sort of happy clappy chatbot when someone's family's just died or they're in hospital. I mean, yeah, I mean, that's the crux of the issue is when you apply this stuff, it has to be absolutely appropriate at the
Yeah.
point of contact.
Yeah, I feel like with chatbots nowadays, it's either too happy-go-lucky and too cheery, or it's not emotional at all. So I feel like there needs to be a balance, and they need to understand the customer's emotions. I think that's a
Yes,
huge thing
yeah.
that companies
And
need to
I
work
think
on.
that the big issue for me as well, it depends on the functionality that chatbot's performing. If it's
Mhm.
just sharing simple encyclopedic type information, so what is the circumference of the Earth or something like that, where it's a very factual thing, then it can be put into place relatively easily without that focus on empathy. But
Mhm.
when you're talking about highly specialized companies, who've got particular insurance needs, I think at this stage we're a long way from getting a chatbot that does much more than saying, "Okay, I recognize this is a complex problem. I'm going to pass you on to a human being who can help you."
Mhm. Yeah, I think it's definitely about striking that balance and knowing when to transition to a live agent and making that transition as smooth as possible.
Absolutely, the omni-channel approach is going to be absolutely critical
Mhm.
for the future, with particularly for insurance.
Yeah. We have a client called the Qatar Insurance Company, and they employ chatbots in an incredible way. Um, we'll talk about that. We actually have a video about it, so I definitely recommend all of you to check it out. It's great. I'll put it down in the description or something, but like, it's a great video to watch, and they use chatbots in an incredible way. It's amazing. So I'm moving on to my last question. Are there any other thoughts you'd like to leave our audience with?
It's really just that we're all sitting at home, self-isolating at the moment. There's one thing for sure. As mentioned jokingly on that radio channel yesterday, that means your insurance agent is not going to come and knock on the door and sell you a policy tomorrow, or
Mhm.
the next day, or the day after that. Perhaps you won't want them to ever do that again. Perhaps you'll be looking to buy your insurance in different ways in the future. And I think, if nothing else, this period, the small silver lining amongst the huge cloud is that there is definitely a huge opportunity to accelerate the application of technology, both chatbots and online sales platforms like our own. Because if this isn't the right time to be doing that, then perhaps there never will be a right time. So I think it's one very positive outcome of COVID is that we should see a acceleration of the adoption of technology. My only worry is that I hope the big insurers and I hope the regulators are up to meeting that challenge and actually helping their customers make that change. That's
Mhm.
going to be critical.
Yes, I agree. I think right now, and I've heard a lot of people say this, but necessity is the greatest form of invention. So I think right now, if we're not embracing technology, like there's no time like the present. And I think it's gonna really change the world in a post-COVID sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, we've got some amazing insights from you. Thank you so much for your time. Engati Engaged will be back with a new expert in a new episode really soon. So stick around and definitely check out our new book on the evolution of customer experience. Thank you so much for talking to us, Steve, and we'll see you on our next episode.
Thank you. You're very welcome.